Hello, everyone. Welcome back. My name is Alan Herrera, and this is another episode of our Foreign Correspondents Talk 2025 edition. I get the wonderful opportunity to speak with really cool, very interesting people, namely the foreign journalists that my organization represents, and I get to hear all about their experiences living and working in the United States and just getting to know who they are and how they've evolved over time. So today I'm very pleased to share that I have the wonderful Bolivian journalist Ana Valdez Saravia. She is here with me from Kansas, which is not where you would expect a Bolivian to show up, right? You would think. But that's the beauty of the US. There are people from all over. So, Anna, I am very happy to have you here with me today, and I'm so looking forward to getting to hear about your insights and just how your career has grown over time. So, thank you.
Thank you, Alan, and hi, everybody. I'm so happy to be joining here today. And yeah, as you mentioned, definitely Kansas is something else. I would have never imagined, I think, being myself here either. But it's been a great journey, and especially to start my career, I feel like a lot of my first steps, I gave it here in Kansas. And mainly what I focus on is covering our Hispanic community, which also sometimes, people don't think there is a big one, but we have a lot in different parts of the state, and especially they work in the agricultural sector or even dairy. So definitely something that I've been covering since I arrived to the States. And my career pretty much started like when I was very little, I think. My parents always listen to radio, so I feel like that's a way that, I don't know, journalists sometimes get involved into news, in different ways. But for me, it was really radio. Like I always remember my dad and my mom waking up very early in the morning, and the first thing they would turn on the radio, and I will be hearing news every single day, every single hour. Um, and I just got interested in that. And then I got the opportunity to come to the US, and I really wanted to do journalism. I think it's a very nice field. I like the idea of being able to share the stories of communities and just be out there in the field. I like visuals a lot, so I love video. And when I got to the US, I arrived here in Kansas. Initially, I didn't know where I was going, but definitely it was a whole journey. My program in my university was also interesting because in that time we didn't have exactly a major in there. It was more like a minor. So I was still trying to, find my way, trying to learn. And I literally went through print, through radio, and now I'm working on TV. So I've been able to taste a little bit of every single part that journalism can offer. And I think, as many journalists probably here in the US, I started in their newspaper in the university, kind of learning the ins and outs. And then our journalism program got cut off from our college, which was very impactful. And I felt like, oh no, what I'm going to do? Like all my journalism experience and what I was hoping to learn, right? But local media was a very safe place where I was able to land and continue learning of the job. I had an incredible friend who introduced me to the local radio in Emporia, Kansas. And that's where I got my first start doing bilingual news. I helped them open their first Spanish news program. And it was definitely a journey. I'm very happy that we got to start it. I was afraid a little bit of how the community will receive it, and even I think the most important, if this was sustainable, right? But it was received very well. The community was very happy to have finally news in their own language, in Spanish. And even after I graduated, the program continues. So it's until today sustainable, it's there, and the community still can have their news. And I think that opened a whole new world for me of the importance of being able to give news in other languages and just being a bilingual journalist and being able to use those skills we have, if you're able to communicate in any other language to reach the communities that are here in the US, because we have so many that speak so many other languages, and they deserve to have their news and that accessibility. And that's when I arrived to New York City. So I jumped to another extreme. I went from a very small place to a very big one. Um, and then I feel I went fully into what I wanted to do, which was video. And I went to the Craig Newmark Graduate School of Journalism, a very great program. They really put you on the field. I always remember my first day in the university. They were like, okay, guys, you are going out reporting. And even if you have never been reporting, like it was just a shock, like, oh, wow, what are we doing, right? So we were out there in the streets of New York City. I've never been in New York City before that. So obviously that was also like my first time doing all that. But it was an amazing experience, definitely being out there in the field in a city like New York, that is so diverse, so rich, and just so full of stories. And it really opened a whole, new world. Like, oh my God, there's so many things that I could do. And we had our bilingual program, which was the first one in the nation that started. And just being there and learning and having that ability to report in English, but then, move to Spanish and still covering our communities, especially during a crucial time. In that time, we were having a lot of immigrants arriving to the city, going to Roosevelt Hotel and other shelters. So it was definitely a unique experience for me and the path I wanted to follow and the coverage I wanted to do, especially, growing a little bit in that career. And once the summer arrived, our university helps us to land internships. And really wanted to be with a bilingual media because I really wanted to continue using both languages and kind of focusing on that coverage that I've been doing. And I got the opportunity to be with NBC New York and Telemundo 47, and it was the Olympics, and everything was just like really great. I feel like that potential of being able to cover news in both languages, I really reached it. I was where I really wanted to be, and it really led me to where else I wanted to go after graduation. And once that happened, I was continuing loving that coverage of bilingual news and just our community, because yes, it's important to have Spanish news, but the truth is also that our Hispanic and Latino communities have evolved a lot in the US, and sometimes they don't speak Spanish anymore, but they still want to know news that are related to their community, and to you are able to offer that in English as well. And that's when I got my job here in Kansas again. So I came back here to Wichita, Kansas, and now I am with KWCH, which is a CBS affiliate, and I helped them open their first Spanish news program. We reactivated it. Is now something that is built in house, which I think is really great. It's not necessarily supported by, big national Spanish news outlets like we have. But the beauty of this is that English media are able to see how important it is to give this news to our communities and are starting to build their own in-house programming. And I'm happy that I was able to be part of it and inaugurate it. We've been already doing our news every single day since March. And the community has been very happy with that, being able to, have more coverage of what they're doing, especially during this crucial time where they're really looking to have uh, news and things that are fact check, and pretty much seeing that there's someone there that is able to share their stories. So that's where I am right now, and it's definitely been a whole journey of opening first things and just giving first steps. But I think that's the beauty of journalism, that we're always innovating and just trying to do the best for our communities.
You make some really excellent points there about how, again, well, journalists need to be very adaptable, right? You need to be very adaptable as you jump from experience to experience. I mean, look, you went from, like you said, this small town to being dumped in the middle of New York City and just go out there, figure it out, go report on stories, right? And the expectation when you're in a program as esteemed as that one is, well, you already know the basics, but it's still it's still quite a change. That is a massive change. Um, and there's another point that you made actually about sustainability that I thought was very interesting because years ago, I one of my first jobs was with the United States Census Bureau. And I would go around, and of course, I'd be knocking on doors because we had to count people in our neighborhoods or whichever neighborhood we happened to be assigned in. And it was a fascinating experience, and it really gave me insight into just how the system worked. And being fluent in Spanish, my supervisor, the field supervisor, told me, "Oh, Alan, go out there and speak, and speak to your people." So I said, "Great." So I would go to knock on people's doors And I would deal with, of course, I dealt with people from all, many different countries, many different languages, but I'll use the Spanish-speaking community as the best example here. I'd knock on people's doors and they would be a little hesitant to speak to me. They'd say, "Oh no, what is this about?" And naturally, and I think it's just because there is such a that attitudes toward immigration in the U.S., right, are very complicated and can veer toward the more conservative. So I would go to people and they'd say, "Oh no, what is this about? I don't want to volunteer that information, etc." And I would tell them, "Hey, um, the reason why this is important is because if we don't know, for example, how many Spanish speakers there are in a given area, then we won't know what resources the community will actually need in order to thrive, right? So I would tell people, let's say you want to learn, you want to learn English, but there isn't enough, Spanish language material in the library, right, to help you sort of make that transition and like to begin learning this new language. That was when it clicked for them and they said, "Oh, so like this actually helps me." And it's like, yes, of course. And it's the same principle with journalism, right? It's the same principle here with journalism. We have a Spanish speaking community here in Kansas, right? In Kansas or what have you. We need to be able to tell these stories because we know that these people are there. You're not just speaking into the void. And I imagine that that for you, especially coming from Bolivia, that it's just it's again, it's just a whole new experience. So like, did you go through perhaps a period of culture shock while you were getting accustomed? Because again, you went from one world to another, and then another world in New York, and then back.
No, definitely. I feel like when I first arrived to the US, like everything was new, and especially, I'm from La Paz, Bolivia. It's a big city. It's very
Hmm.
intercultural, and I think my country itself, like it's very diverse. We're learned to, accept everybody. And as any country, we have our struggles, but I had an upbringing where my parents really pushed me to see the world that I was around, and not be in a bubble. So, we have a very big indigenous community, and sometimes we will have the radio also that they will give to our indigenous community. So I think like that also expanded my mind of, we're able to provide news for our indigenous communities in Bolivia in their language. And then, moving to the US, I knew there was a big Hispanic community, especially when I got to Emporia, and just seeing them there, I think it really opened my mind to why are they not able to get their news in their language. And I think like a big part, like you were mentioning, sustainability, because before I knew there was a Spanish newspaper, but it's also like who manages and how the community is able to respond to that, right? And overall, it's a commitment. And what happens here sometimes in states like Kansas and other ones that not necessarily have a big influx of Spanish news media is that their community are the ones creating those spaces to inform themselves. And it's a heavy job because, when you think in a news station, you have producers, you have reporters, you have your news there, you have a whole team. But when you are building something from your community, within your community, sometimes these people are just one team person. Like they're just the only ones managing, social media, going out, reporting, submitting the stories, meeting the community. And it's something that really can burn you out. And, aside of that, some of the times these people are not necessarily journalists like maybe you and I. They're like from the community and are trying to just fill that gap that exists. And if you are just one person by yourself, that not necessarily is doing this full time, it can be a lot. And what happens many times is that these little local media end up dying and we see them disappear. And again, there's a gap. So I think like the importance on this is that when we have these Spanish news media ideas, I want to, and even if it's not necessarily Spanish, if you want to create it like on French or other language, and you are part of a big media, I feel it's important to really see that, well, we have now the resources and maybe we can do more and help the community that is already trying to fill that gap. And I think a lot of that is really meeting them where they are. I think like that's something that helped me with my cultural shock, because something that I saw with the Hispanic community here is that, I'm coming from like a different place, but they already are here in the US, they already adapted and all. but they are still, learning the ins and outs because most of them are in this immigration journey as well. So they're adapting to changes and all. And sometimes, someone from news coming to you can be frightening. They can be like, I don't want to speak with you, and like you were mentioning, sometimes they don't want to share with you necessarily their stories because they're afraid of how that could be portrayed. So I think like something that helped me to adapt to the US one was to meet them where they are. They will do their little fiestas or their events, for Dia de los Muertos and other ones. And I will go there and just meet them, not necessarily going with a microphone or with my, pen and everything. Just
Yes.
going and meeting them, telling them like, hey, my name is Ana. I am from Bolivia. I just, arrived to the city or to your town, and I just want to know more about it. And I think like the best way sometimes to go on that place is to meet these organizations that are already within the community and are able to create like this trust. And I think like sometimes journalism is so fast paced these days that we have lost that, building that trust with our communities and letting them know that we really are there with a good intention and really trying to share their stories. Because when they feel that we're just parachuting, it's very difficult for them to open up and really tell us what is happening in a way that also our reporting at the end of the day can help their communities. It's not just us grabbing their stories and putting it on air and then we move to the next thing. Is I think journalism always needs to be sustainable and intentional. And whatever story we're doing with any community has to in a way benefit them, or help to put some light in those problems that maybe they are going through, or even just the good things that they are doing. And I think that's something that the US has taught me and overall the communities out here of, you need to be adaptable, but overall you really need to meet them where you are, and where they are so they can really see that they can trust you overall.
Mhm. That is beautifully said because yes, there's so much local news that is lost every year, and it is very much it's very much a crisis. I mean, I was out with a friend last week and discussing this, and he's not in journalism, but he found this fascinating because he asked me, Alan, there seems to be this void, and I said, yes, void is the perfect word for it, right? And because if you have a void and there's nothing to fill it, then you end up with these people who, they lack adequate information in order to make decisions that will help them become better participants in their community, and that way they could get the resources that they need, right? I said that this is so important, good, because when people know what's going on, they make decisions that lend themselves to good governance. I have found that local news actually helps. And I'm sure that there are many organizations like for example, the Knight Foundation, right, that would agree that good local news just ends up improving quality of life overall, right? Not just mentally, right, but emotionally, physically, spiritually. Being able to feel like you're connected to the people around you is so important. And like you said, so many journalists have, because of this fast pace in journalism today, there is this art of meeting people where they are, of speaking to them that is lost. And people think, oh, why should I interact with you when you're just going to favor speed over accuracy, right? And that's sad. You don't want people to feel that way. But I have found, right, that the best stories that I've enjoyed working on have been the ones where initially I didn't start writing or edit. I typically edited. That was my thing, but I would go out and just like interact with people. But the best stories were the ones where I just went to hang out with people. I didn't go to work necessarily, right? Like you said, you're just going in like, oh, hey, I want to know, what's going on. Hi, introducing yourself. So I would just go and hang out, have a meal, right? Or something like that. And then people see, oh, okay, you're a person who I can talk to. That's the thing. You just being friendly and approachable matters so much in terms of establishing trust with sources. Wouldn't you agree?
No, I definitely agree. And I feel like it's like a chain, because when I got
Mm.
here to Wichita, Kansas, I was really afraid of, okay, how am I going to build, trust with the community, especially, we're thinking to launch this new Spanish news program. How can I make them feel, safe and comfortable to share their stories with me? So I started, with organizations that I knew, they were very grassroots and they were helping the community already, and just meeting them, telling them like, hey, my name is Ana. I just joined the team. I'm helping with this Spanish news program. I want to learn more about your organization. And I feel like giving that step, just not even, hey, I want to interview you and like tell me everything.
Mhm.
It was just like let's meet, let's talk, tell me a little bit about you. I tell you a little bit about me. It really created a nice connection. And then they will tell other organizations that I didn't reach yet. Hey, I met this journalist. Her name is Anna. She's doing this for our community. And then when I will eventually meet them, later in other events, they will already know who I was and what I was doing. And they will be very happy, to meet with me and to share. And they will share me like their cards and their stories. And I think that really created that space that I needed to start, meeting the community and letting them know like I am here and I'm here to share your stories and help you. But I think like it's really a dedication that sometimes we forget. It's very easy like let me just go and email this organization and like set up a meeting and an interview, but we forget about like they know each other, especially in small towns like Wichita. They everybody knows each other, so being able to connect with one, show them your intention, then they tell everybody else, and
Mhm.
then it's easier for you to reach everybody and really show your work and show what you're trying to do. And even it's with the little simple things, like for example, here the Hispanic community is very on Facebook. So I literally went and joined every single Facebook group that I could find from them, even the like Craigslist ones, like where they're selling and all, because that's where you see what the community is talking about, like the problems that they have. That's their social media. And I share the links there, that's where like people feel comfortable. And we have created an audience there as well, not necessarily being sometimes in events that is, difficult to reach people, but also on social media, and I think that's something that as journalists, we need to adapt. We go to a place, and like in New York, for example, we have communities that prefer to use WhatsApp. So we create a WhatsApp channel for them, or we have communities that prefer WeChat. So we create a WeChat, group for them. So in that way, we can continue being connected, especially in this time where, everything is going online and people are being there more. And we need to be there as well, to continue sharing news with them. But definitely, I think like giving those first steps and really meeting the community where they are and being able to connect with them, it's really a big step for journalists. And I think even in a fast-paced environment like we are nowadays, it's something that we still should take the time, to really show that we're not there just parachuting and then leaving, because I feel that that's something that has break many times the confidence with our communities. And then when we have, big stories, they don't want to talk to you. And it's fair, because then they don't know who you are. They have never seen you, and then you just come in to grab their story and leaving. And they will never know, did you even use it? Did it help our community? They don't know. And I feel like that's something that we need to get better at, even in this fast environment that we are currently.
Mhm. Yes, I mean, uh, people want to see tangible results. They want a tangible result. They want something that they can actually see. They're like, oh, okay, so like you said just now, oh, is my story going to be featured? Is it helping? Yes, like we should do that. Follow through, following through, following up is so important. So much of a journalist's success is based on reputation. Is based on reputation. You want people to be able to say, "Oh, yes, Anna. Anna is, so trustworthy. Anna's cool. Absolutely go speak with Anna," right? And it sounds like you've established that. And I think, for example, what you just said about the way that you've used social media to connect, right, with different communities. It's so important. And I mean, look, my entire family is on WhatsApp. Everybody's on WhatsApp. You're not going to find them here or there or whatever. It's WhatsApp. So if I'm now, obviously, I've been in journalism, right? But if I wasn't related to them and I wanted to speak to these people, if I don't actually make a WhatsApp, then I'm never going to know what they're into. Like, what are their stories about? What are their actual concerns, right? What do they want to hear? What do they want to see? You know, it's crucial. And as somebody who has been born and raised here in New York City, I'm born and raised here in New York City. My the needs of the community around me, while different communities, while there's always commonalities, I find the needs of a community in New York City are vastly different compared to the needs of a community in somewhere like Emporia, like you said, or in Wichita. And being able to understand that, to navigate these nuances effectively, that lends itself to good reporting, better reporting practices. Every news organization develops their own what's the word here? Um, they essentially they have they have their own system that they work out, and a newsroom that is able to speak effectively to the community is then able to go back to their office, meet with their team, and they're able to craft policies and approaches that actually put the people at the forefront, because at the end of the day, right, like these are the ones who we serve, right? Like journalism is not supposed to be it's not it shouldn't be a self-serving profession. That's why it's called a calling instead of instead of a job, I mean, you yourself, you mentioned how earlier your parents really helped foster this understanding that the world was larger than La Paz, right? And La Paz is a major city, right? But the world is still larger than La Paz. There's always people to meet within your country, people to meet outside of your country. And by expanding your sphere of influence, by being open to doing that always, that just creates more effective and impactful reporting.
Definitely. And I think like I think the beauty of nowadays, that sometimes people take it for granted. We are able to literally go to the internet and get to know the whole world. You don't need to necessarily go anymore, and buy a plane ticket or something. You can just Google it and just, as a journalist, you want to know what is happening in another country. You can go and see their media and learn what is happening. And like now in the US, for example, as you were mentioning, some of the, I think, biggest stories I've been able to do, it's been through really these Facebook groups that sometimes, they will post something and it will lead to another thing, and it will just create itself the story. Not necessarily, coming from a press release or things like that sometimes it's very easy to fall to. And just I think that right now we as journalists have like a greater um, intention and purpose, really, because people right now, and even with AI, I think, they are more hesitant to news and what is happening. And also, like, again, news has been so fast paced lately that even, current media that we knew was like newspapers always, like the New York Times or the Washington Post, they are now turning also to social media. Now they're doing video, they're doing audio, because they know they need to reach a larger audience that doesn't necessarily read anymore the newspaper. They don't go, they buy it and they, read it. Now we need to adapt a lot. And like for our Spanish news program that we started here in Wichita, it was very easy to think maybe we can create a broadcast section, and we're going to be every single day at 3 p.m. as our normal newscast. But then I thought, our community, like they work regular jobs that irregular jobs sometimes that not necessarily allow them to be in a 9 to 5, like everybody else. Sometimes they are working longer hours and they are not necessarily going to sit down and watch us for like an hour. So what is other way that we can reach them? And so we decided to go fully virtual. So we will, record our newscast and then we will share it in social media, because in that way we know like if they are at work or something, they can just click it and see us. And I think that that's pretty much adapting to your community and learning the needs and meeting them where they are. And especially here in Kansas, our communities are very spread out, but they're also very concentrated in the places where they are spread out. So giving them news that are happening, there also helps a lot, and like you were saying, New York City is very big. Like I just remember when I was reporting there, if you want to go to the Bronx, then to Brooklyn, it was like a very big distance, a lot of movement. But here, for example, if you want to go to Garden City, where we have like a big Hispanic community, it's about a 3 hour drive from where I am. So doing a 3 hour drive every single day, it can be challenging, but if you're able to do it, then just do it. But other way to go through it is just, joining these Facebook groups from, Hispanics in Garden City or in Liberal. And in that way you're getting to know like what is happening in the community. Like I know right now, with the immigration rates and all happening, that was something that they were sharing just on Facebook groups, and that's the way like we will know, oh, this is happening, maybe we can go and report on this. Otherwise, we will not know. But it's because we are in those Facebook groups and we know what is happening, or we are in the WhatsApp groups and we know what is happening. Otherwise, if you're just waiting for news to ring to you, you're never gonna know what to do and like how to serve your community. And I think like for young journalists, especially for me, going into the industry right now, it was very hard, but I think like a big lesson for me has been being adaptable and kind of shifting what we already know of journalism and make it more community wise, even when you're part of a big media or a big streaming media like I am in the English side. We're still able to localize and feel more community wise with the Hispanic community that I am covering, and just being in there, because otherwise, it's very difficult to just be there, but think that you are there and not necessarily being with the community, because otherwise how you are cultivating that trust, and how are you building those resources that eventually the community is looking, because when you are able to really go and meet them, and then you show the reporting, and then they feel like, okay, I can trust these journalists, then news start coming to you, and they will call me and messaging me and tell me like, hey, this is happening here or this is happening out there. And you start building that network that essentially I feel it's more powerful than sometimes just having a spokesperson for a company or an organization. You really need the voices of who are being impacted by changes, by policies. And I feel that that's something that sometimes as journalists we tend to lose. It's very easy for us to go to the route of, let me have the spokesperson, but we need to start doing more those steps of really connecting with the community and being able to have their voices, because otherwise, like, does the story really have intention?
Mhm. Yes, absolutely. And I think the general theme here that I'm hearing as we while listening to you and just as we unpack these thoughts. This is such a huge topic, right? This is such a huge topic, an important one, but I think important the most important topics are the ones that really need to be dissected and analyzed. And the big one that I think that journalists um, should really consider is just the importance of audience development, right? And it sounds like you have developed a very keen understanding of, of who your audience is, right? And how to reach them and how to figure out these are the things that matter, to this community. These are the immediate concerns, of this community. And if this community ends up feeling like, oh, look, there are these people like Ana, like her colleagues with her publication, who are actually listening to us, that spreads farther, it spreads wider. You become a trusted voice, a bastion that the community can rely on to feel, and they in turn feel like, oh, here we have people who are reporting accurately. I think that one of the big things that I find that I've always found interesting was when people say, oh, that journalists are too busy being activists instead of reporting the news. But what I find very funny about that is that good journalism, right, that centers the people at the heart of the story, actually, brings their concerns to light, spotlights them in a way that lends itself to what I guess critics would say is activism, because at the end of the day you are being a champion of your community. If you're not actually engaging with your community, how are you supposed to get anything done? I've always found that very interesting, because good journalism yields positive results. It yields positive results. And that this doesn't happen in a vacuum. It's not like somebody writes a story and then all of a sudden people care about it. you know like, this for a fact, how much content it just ends up on the internet that is not read, or that could have a much, right? I mean, you're nodding, you get it, right? Like, how much could have a much wider impact, but hasn't necessarily been produced with with consideration, right? these are key questions that I find that we as journalists, right, that we're always thinking about, we always need to consider. And I would love to, I would love to know, Anna, given that, you've developed your own style, right? You've developed your own style. Could you tell me what was it like for you as you just slowly you realized, oh, okay, this is what's working and these are the stories that, that I like to tell. When did you realize this is what I want to dedicate myself to?
I think, oof, that's a good question. I think definitely once a story, well, I'm going back to what you were saying of, these days in journalism being seen as activist. I think like you can still be a person who is objective and a journalist that is still objective, right? Showing both sides, but still you're showing the facts. And I think sometimes what has happened lately is that we see facts that are proving something, and then immediately people feel like, oh, that is activism. But
Mm-hmm.
what is showing is pretty much what is happening in a community and how they're getting impacted by a policy or they're getting impacted by an issue, everything that is happening within it. That doesn't mean that necessarily is activism. And I think like what it means is that, and it might sound cliche, but as journalists, I want to think every story that I'm doing that is serving a greater purpose, that is serving someone out there to figure what the system is and to know that there is a solution to what they're going through. And it might sound cliche, because it's like a big dream that I think like most journalists have. Like, I'm gonna do a story and it's gonna change the world. But it really can change a community. And I think like that itself is activism that we're doing, and I think like that's the purpose that we have as journalists. We're not just doing stories just to feed our newscast or just to feed our newspaper. We're doing stories for the end of the day to reach the community and hopefully help them in a way, because at the end of the day, the way I think it is that the communities are not, forced to give us their stories. The fact that someone is able to sit down with you and open themselves up and share you what is happening there, it's a privilege. And it's something that many times is taken for granted in journalism. And, they're not just our sources, they are people who are, once you leave, they are still going to go through the same problem probably, unless your story is able to provide some resource or some help. And I think that's what journalism is becoming nowadays. And I think that's a nice path that is taking of really, doing activism in a way for these communities. And I think for me, the moment I really realized this is what I want to do, and this is what I feel like it's my calling, if we want to call it like that, um, was when I saw a story, that initiated in Facebook. It was a family, and they posted that the dad was detained by ICE. And it just started on Facebook, but it reached out to me, so I reached out the family, and we were able to sit down and talk. And after we did the story, in comparison, I think, to other ways that other media around me did it, I feel like mine ended up having a purpose with them, because I was able to, one, understand their language, understand where they were coming from, because like them, I'm also, on a visa. I understand the immigration system within it. And I was able to understand what had happened and not just use it like in Spanish, we call it, noticias amarillistas, or just like a shocking news of, oh my God, someone was detained, but I was able to show it of like, it's a bigger thing behind. This person was able to do their process, they were doing everything step by step, and this is what happened. So the story reached differently, and in comparison to other, outlets that did it, because when the family came to us, they were already afraid because they have received so much like hate and just um it was not a good situation. But when I was able to speak them in Spanish and just connecting with them, they understood like where I was coming from, and I understood where they were coming from. The story itself narrated itself very differently, and the end result was that thanks to that story, it brought up a light into what they were going through. And the dad was able to be released from detention, and currently he's fighting his case. But for me, it was just mind-blowing because it was like my first weeks in the news station, and I really didn't know where the story was going to go. And especially, that's when we were seeing the first changes in immigration policies and all, and I was also starting to understand them because it was something also new for me. But being able to meet them where they were and trying to understand their bigger scope of like what they're going as community, and then seeing how the story was able to help in a way to shed a light into what was happening, and then the father being released. And overall, I think for me the key part was that after that happened, I reached out to the family again a few weeks later to know how they were doing, and they really appreciate that follow-up. They were like, thank you for really following up, because like nobody else has done it. And I think for me that's when I realized like there is purpose for me in this. And I think like really it showed me that this is not just a job, it's really something that I'm here for the community. And the reason I'm able at the end of the day, and I think like something that journalists forget a lot, is that the reason that we're able to have our jobs is because there is communities out there that are able to share their stories. Because otherwise, how we will be telling stories, right? Whose stories will be telling, right? So it's really thanks to them. And I think like that moment really was like a click in my mind of there is so much else to do and there's so much work to do. I'm just starting, but just seeing the impact of just doing that story in my first weeks, it really showed me that there's so much else that I can do and continue, this path of creating that bond with the community and just continue reporting their stories, whether it be in education, whether it be in healthcare or any other. I think like that is what I start doing more with my stories, and trying to hope that every story that I do, there is an element that hopefully someone that will see it will feel like understanding more the system, and they will feel that they have now more knowledge that they can use to fight it if that's the case, because I think that's what our journalism should be. We should be able to give with our reporting these tools to our community, so then they can fight what they are trying to resolve. And I think for me that was like the biggest moment of it. And it really comes back to really home, because my parents grew up through the dictatorships, and for them being informed was key, because otherwise how will you know what was happening out there? And I feel like that's something that I really took away with me when I came to the US, the importance of being informed and the importance to have a trusting news media or just a trusting news reporter for you to be able to have that knowledge and really being able to find a solution to whatever problem your community is having.
I think that that is a wonderful note to end things on here today. I think you really showed to me, Anna, just from over the course of this conversation, you really have a keen understanding of how crucial it is. It's so crucial, right? For journalists to be able, again, right, the larger theme of this conversation, because that's what happens, right? Like start asking questions and then you find the topic and then that's how it just evolves. Just no, the importance of following up, the importance of, just understanding that reputation is everything, in journalism. The fact that problems, you said it just now, right? I thought it was such a good point. The fact that just because you're addressing a problem in a piece doesn't mean that it goes away. It's not over. It keeps existing even after the story, even after the story's out there. Like the point of the story is to draw attention and perhaps, right, and more attention will help, right? But people at the end of the day, they'll still need to get up, they'll still need to go to work, they'll still need to balance everything they need to balance. But if they have good journalism, if they had good journalists on their side, their quality of life can improve, right? And they have opportunities to just connect with the larger community and with people who are placing the needs of citizens, of the human beings or the human beings around them who just want to feel seen and heard, placing that at the forefront. It's so important. So thank you so much, Anna. It's always such a pleasure to be here with another fellow Spanish speaker. It always makes me happy when I'm speaking to mi gente, when I'm when I'm doing these interviews. So I just want to thank you for joining me here today for our interview.
No, thank you, Alan, really for this conversation, and just hoping that this reach, all the journalists, but especially, now that we have a new generation, hopefully this will help them to be more intentional with their journalism, because at the end of the day, you and I are gonna grow old, but we have a generation behind us that need these resources, and hopefully these will help them to continue a very intentional journalism, and especially for our communities in the US that right now what they want is fact check news, and they want to feel informed, but overall they want to feel that someone is bringing a solution to the problem, because like you're saying, we live sometimes, but they are still going to be there, with the problem. And what we hope is that our reporting really brings at least a small change and helps them to go through the day with that. So thank you for doing this series, so we can continue sharing more advice and our community grows.